Hello and welcome. I'm going to do a quick and dirty review of the Ricoh Singlex TLS. I have previously done a preview video in which I discussed the history of this camera, which is pretty interesting. There were a number of different brands under which this design was marketed. You may have a camera which looks almost identical to this one, but is branded differently, and there's reasons for that, and it's actually kind of interesting. So please see my preview video where I talk about the history of this camera and its various iterations and versions. Today I'm just going to go over the functionality of it. So the Ricoh Singlex TLS is a 35mm single lens reflex camera in the M42 screw mount, also known as the Pentax Practica screw mount, also known as the universal thread mount. And I'll show you that shortly. I'll show you what I mean shortly. Let's start with the top plate. Okay, on top of the camera you've got your your shutter release button, your frame counter, advance lever, there's your serial number, and the rewind crank. Okay, shutter release button right here. Why has it got the hole in it? Good question. Okay, it's just a button that goes up and down. That's it. This surround piece is largely decorative. It doesn't do anything. There is no shutter lockout provision on this camera. So if the shutter is cocked like so, you can discharge it. Some cameras had a safety feature requiring that you deploy the lever to this position before firing. This camera does not. So my suggestion is get in the habit of advancing the film before you take a picture and not after. First of all, you do not want to leave the shutter under tension any longer than is necessary. And secondly, once the shutter's cocked, you could accidentally discharge it while fumbling around in your camera bag, and so you don't want that. So why does the shutter release button have that hole in it? It's a threaded hole, and it's there for a reason. And the reason is so that it can accept one of these. This is called a cable release, and it is a short cable which screws onto into that threaded hole, and you use this little plunger here to release the shutter. And this is how you would release a shutter with a camera mounted on a tripod back in the old days. And you can find these things at either on, I'm sure, on online or at retail establishments that sell old photography equipment and accessories. If you want one, just look for cable release. That's what they're called. Okay, so I cocked it's cocked, very good. And so now I can, there you go, that's it. That's all there is to it. And that is how you release the shutter when the camera is mounted on a tripod. Okay, the advance lever, this does two things. It advances the film and it cocks the shutter. And it also has this standoff, it's got the standoff position right here, although there's no functional value to this. In some cameras, the standoff position is connected with a shutter lockout function or the operation of the light meter. Not on this camera. It's just there for convenience because some people like to have the advanced lever in that position so they can shoot quickly and advance the film quickly. It's just a personal choice of convenience, but it doesn't actually doesn't do anything. Let's see here. So moving over here, we've got the pentaprism. Underneath this metal enclosure is a piece of glass which reflects the image coming in from the lens through the viewfinder. This camera also had an accessory cold shoe. So this is an accessory. It would have come with the camera when new. Your version may or may not have one. They get lost over time because they slip on and off. So this accessory shoe will slip on camera like so. That's it. That's all you got to do to attach it. And now you can put a flash unit here, or you can put an accessory light meter or some other accessory which is made or designed to be used with shoes of this type. All right, and I think that's all we need to know about that. Okay. On this side, we've got a rewind crank. When you're finished shooting your roll of film, then you're going to press this button right here to disengage the mechanism which prevents the film from moving backwards, and then deploy your rewind crank here, and rewind the film into the canister like so. I covered this in detail in the video I did about loading film into this camera, so please see my loading film playlist on the channel in which I demonstrate loading film into a variety of cameras, including this one. So I'm not going to demonstrate that here in this video. We also have a reminder dial around the film rewind crank, and the reminder dial has no functional value. It's just there to remind you what you've got inside the camera. So, for example, if the camera's empty, you can put it on the empty reminder. B and W obviously is for black and white, and then there are two settings for color: D for daylight and T for tungsten. There's only one tungsten film that's still available to my knowledge. That's Lomography. No, it's not Lomography. It's Cinestill. Sorry, Cinestill 800. I think Cinestill 800 is still made in tungsten. That's the film that everybody loves to shoot old gas stations and neon signs with. Other than that, I don't think there's any tungsten film left. Back in the old days, if you were shooting indoors, you would use tungsten film. Outdoors, you can use daylight, because again, back in the old days, light bulbs were made with a tungsten filament, which produced a very different color temperature than daylight. Nowadays, on digital camera, this is controlled by the white balance setting. But back in the old days, you had to use different film emulsions for different white balances. All right, that takes care of that. Let's go to the front of the camera. So, on the front of the camera, the first thing we have right here is the ASA and shutter speed dial. So the ASA stands for American Standards Association. In the 1980s, that was superseded by ISO, or the International Standards Organization, although the method of measurement stayed the same. So ASA and ISO are the same thing. It was just renamed back in the 80s. And you would set the film speed by lifting up on this rim and moving the indicator to your desired film speed. This one goes from 1600 down to 25, and all points in between, or actually all points in between, in 1/3 stop increments. This dial also is used to change shutter speeds. On most cameras of this era, the shutter speed dial is up here. This is a somewhat non-standard control placement, but it works nonetheless. And we have a shutter speed range from B. Why B is in green? Don't know. B stands for bulb, and for historical reasons it's called bulb. And what it means is that the shutter will remain open for as long as the shutter release button remains depressed. 1 second, and then all the way up to 1/1000th of a second, which was a perfectly normal range of speeds for a camera back in this era. The speeds 1,500 and 250 are in white, 125 and 60 and below are in red. I'm really not sure why. I thought maybe it was connected to the suggested speeds for hand holding the camera, but really that should be, most people can hand hold at 125 and even 160, so I'm not sure. I'm really not sure why they're different colors, but there's no functional value to it, so don't worry about it. I also want to talk about this lever here, which is the self-timer lever. I would advise caution before relying on these old self-timers. The spring mechanisms behind these old self-timers are often weak and rusted, and they're not particularly strong. And let me demonstrate this and then describe for you the problem that you might have and why I don't recommend using them. So the first thing we're going to do is advance the film, cock the shutter. Then I'm going to move the self-timer lever down here, okay? And then to activate it, I hit the shutter release button like so. And I tell you what, I'm gonna put the microphone over here so you can hear it. Here you go. Okay, so that is not the most confidence-inspiring mechanical sound I've ever heard. And I tell you, I just get nervous every time I do that, because what can happen is, let's say you cock the shutter, you pull this lever down, you release the shutter here, the self-timer starts, and then about halfway through the cycle, it just stops. That can happen. These old springs, if they're rusty or weak, they can wear out. And if the self-timer stops halfway through the cycle without completing the cycle, then you can't take a picture. You can't take the next photograph because you've already cocked it. You've already pressed the shutter release. All you're waiting for is for this thing to get back to its home position. Well, what if it lacks the strength to do that and if it's all worn out? Then you got to take the camera to a repair shop. And nowadays those are hard to come by. So I strongly advise caution before relying on these old mechanical self-timers. Over here you've got the light meter switch here. Now this camera uses what's called stop-down metering, so I need to talk about the lenses for a bit. So let's see, well, first thing we're going to do is let's demonstrate the lens mount. Well, one of the wonderful things about M42 is that because it was what today we would call an open source, I guess, open source piece of intellectual property or an open source design, anyone can make lenses in this mount, and so many companies did. And so you can, there were a variety of Japanese companies and also Soviet and East German companies which made lenses for this mount. This one happens to be from Pentacon, the East German firm, and so there's no trick to mounting and removing these old lenses. You just screw and unscrew them. It's extremely simple. But here on the back, that's what I want to show you. This little pin on the back opens and closes the apertures on the lens. So for example, let's close that down to 16. And if I take you see there? Okay. So that pin on the back opens and closes those, the iris or the diaphragm. And what happens is, when I activate this switch here, there is a little bar right at the bottom, which I'm not sure how well you can see that move as I do this. Can you see that? I don't know. That's kind of tough. But what happens is, when you activate the light meter, when you push this switch does two things. Number one, it stops down the lens. Number two, it activates the light meter. So in order for the light meter to give you an accurate reading in this camera, it's reading the actual light transmitted by the lens at the working aperture. And so you've got to stop it down, okay? Well, why don't you just keep the lens stopped down all the time? Why do you have to stop it down and then open it up? Isn't that kind of silly? Well, the reason is, when the lens is stopped down, when it's closed down to a narrow aperture, the image inside the viewfinder becomes extremely dim, and it's hard to see, and it can be very difficult to focus. So you want the lens wide open for focusing and composing, and then you need to get a light reading with the lens at its working aperture. So that's why these old M42 cameras many of them used a light metering switch of this style, whereby you put it in the on position. Now the current is on, the light meter is on, and the lens is now stopped down. Okay, and you switch it on and off like so. Okay, and that's all there is to it. All right, very good. So there we covered our light meter. Let's talk about the battery, because this camera, while it is entirely mechanical, it does not need a battery to operate unless you want to use the light meter. The light meter takes a battery, or it requires a battery for usage. Nothing else does. And many of these older cameras, the light meters aren't particularly accurate, or sometimes they're just not working at all, so there's no point in using a battery. But if you're lucky enough to have a model with a functional light meter, then you'll need to know how to change the battery. Here's the battery door right there. Also on the bottom plate, we've got the battery door. That's the tripod bushing, and that is the button that you push at the end of your roll of film to disengage the mechanism to allow you to rewind the film. Okay, so we're going to open up our battery door like so. Pretty much any coin will do, most coins. And we open up like so. All right, okay, now our battery compartment is open. This camera was designed for a mercury battery, which output 1.35 volts. Nowadays, mercury batteries are unobtainable, but you can get alkaline replacement cells, which put out 1.5 volts. The voltage discrepancy can cause problems in the light meters of many cameras of the era. This one actually fairly accurate. You're going to insert the battery with the, well, it's kind of like a little mushroom head style, and the mushroom part goes down, I guess you could say. Or part of the battery is going to have some writing on it, and it should also have a plus symbol. And you look at the battery door here, and that's going to have a plus symbol in the battery door. So that indicates that the positive terminal of the battery, which is this side, needs to be facing this part of the battery door. So we're going to place the cell in the battery compartment like so. Replace the battery door, and just get it started. There we are. You can just use our finger to screw that in, and then when it's finger tight, we take our coin and give it just a slight, don't even need to, just a very slight turn. Don't over tighten. Be very careful not to over tighten these battery doors. If you strip the threads, you're screwed. There's no replacement parts available. So be gentle with your battery door. Do not apply force. Just be gentle with it. Okay. Again, I don't know if your camera may have an accurate light meter or may not. The light meter in this camera is actually pretty accurate. I measured it against my my Sekonic 208 in a couple of different lighting situations, and the light meter in this camera generally agreed within a half a stop of the Sekonic, which is pretty darn good for a camera of this age. It is entirely possible that at some point in the past the previous owner may have taken this to a tech and had it voltage converted. A lot of people did that with their old Mercury battery-powered cameras back in the 80s and 90s. If they were still using them, they would take it to a repair station or repair shop, and a technician could insert a diode or resistor to lower the output of the 1.5 volt to 1.35. That may have happened on this camera, I don't know, or it may be the case that the voltage discrepancy on this particular model just doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I don't know which of those is true. If you have a camera which, if you put a battery in your camera and it reacts to light, then you need to measure it against a light meter of known reliability in order to determine whether or not your light meter is accurate. Okay, so yeah, well, and you do that by looking through the viewfinder, and in the viewfinder there, you're going to see on the right-hand side there's a couple of pincers, and it's, well, just a couple of pincers, like two fingers, and a needle. And the needle goes, the needle's going to go up and down between the pincers. And your goal is to, as you turn the aperture, as you adjust the shutter speed, you want to get that needle in between the pincers. And that's it. And once the needle is in between those pincers, then you've got good exposure. And that's all there is to it. And I hope you enjoyed my high-tech graphics. Nothing but the best on my channel, absolutely. Okay, although the viewfinder of this camera is very simple. On the right-hand side, you've got those pincers and the needle for the light meter. And in the center, you have a microprism spot for focusing. And a microprism spot is simply a focusing device which looks very grainy and granular when out of focus, and as you focus and you get the item into focus, the graininess or the granular nature of the image becomes smooth until it becomes smooth and transparent as glass. And when you no longer see any granularity to it, then you know you're in focus. I'm not sure if that makes any sense as you're listening to me. But pick up your camera, take a look through the viewfinder. You'll see what I'm talking about. They're very intuitive and not hard to get used to. So that should not be a difficult challenge. Let's see here. So we covered the front of the camera and the top of the camera and the bottom. All right, let's take a look at the inside of the camera. How about that? To open the back of the camera, you do like so. You simply pull up on the rewind button or the rewind knob here, and voila, open the camera. In the back, up inside the camera like so, you've got this is the compartment for loading film. And again, please see my loading film video where I demonstrate that. These chrome-plated or silver-colored strips right here are the guide rails which guide the film across the back of the camera. This obviously is the shutter. Don't touch it. Do not touch the shutter with anything, not your fingers, not a pencil, nothing. That is a stainless steel copal square shutter, one of the finest photographic inventions of the 20th century. Most cameras of this period had a rubberized cloth shutter, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but I did a separate video talking about cloth shutters versus metal shutters. I personally prefer the Copal Square shutter. I just think it's a wonderful, they're extremely reliable. They just don't break. They're really reliable. And in an era where finding repair shops is increasingly difficult, then the value of reliability in these old cameras goes up and up. So Copal Square shutter, high marks for reliability, which is why I like it. This side you've got the camera back. This is the pressure plate. Its job is simply to keep the film pressed against the back of the camera like so. Again, if the only reason you need to open and close the back of the camera is to load film or to load and unload film. So please do see my video about that. I've got a playlist called Loading Film, so please do see that. All right, that's there. Okay, I think we have covered most of the operations of this camera. So I hope you found this video. Let's see, did we cover it? Did we cover everything I wanted to cover? Yeah, I think so. I've talked long enough. That's enough rambling about this camera. It's enough to get you started anyway. I will put a link down below to where you can download the owner's manual for more information on the operation of the camera. And it's a very simple, basic, no frills, yet well-built, solid, reliable picture-taking device. If you're getting into film, you can do a lot worse than one of these. This is a nice little camera. I've put about 25 rolls of film through it since I purchased it about not quite a year ago. And I've been very happy with it, and I definitely recommend it. This is a good, affordable option for someone wanting to get into 35mm photography. Okay, I hope you found this video interesting or helpful, and if so, please do like and subscribe and check out the links down below. Thank you now. Take care. Bye-bye.